Two. And you're very welcome to another edition of the Solid Foundations Property Podcast. I do hope you're well, and I do hope the summer months, well, you've enjoyed a little bit of good weather. And it's all happening out there in the property market, as is ever across Ireland, Northern Ireland, and into the UK. It's been fun, hasn't it, Lisa? How are you?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, we're having a good summer fun over here. I'm in the UK at the moment, and they're having a mini heat wave over here. So I'm on this like business retreat for a week with Progressive Property. So no, we're having a good times over here.
Topping
How
up
about
the
yourself, Pauric?
education. Topping up the education, Lisa. All good, yeah. The heat wave hasn't hit it, the parts of Donegal, but it was a couple of weeks ago. It was lovely, so I feel your pain, but we'll get it back. We'll get it back, So, look, Lisa, I suppose lots happening in the Irish and the UK markets, Northern Ireland markets, over the last number of weeks and months, as we spoke about. But there's a lot of interesting elements that is happening down south in the southern market, and we have a fantastic guest to bring us on, and discuss about that in a little bit more depth. Who have we got in the podcast this month, Lisa?
So, a couple of weeks ago, the government announced proposed changes to the whole kind of rent pressure zone and resetting market rents. And I think they thought that this was going to create a load of kind of, buzz and extra landlords coming to the market. And I think it's actually done the opposite. So we decided to bring on probably the biggest expert that we know in the Irish property market to come onto the podcast and talk about it and go through it with us. So Mary Conway, she is the president of the IPOA, the Irish Property Association, and she also runs her own letting agency, Janus Estates. Thanks for coming on to the show, Mary. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hi, thanks to you both for the invitation. Yes, I'm the chairperson of the Irish Property Owners Association. So I represent property owners right around the country, from one property up to 100 properties and anything in between. And we also work with a lot of letting agents. So we have been campaigning for a long time to get rid of the rent pressure zones. For anybody that doesn't know, they were brought in 2016 as a temporary measure to cool the rising rents at that stage. And initially it came in Dublin and some of the other higher density areas. And what has happened from the beginning of June is that they have introduced rent pressure zones right across the country. So what does a rent pressure zone mean? It means that rents can only go up by a maximum of 2% a year, or the harmonised index consumer price, which is based on European a basket of European products as such. So one of the things that comes into that mix, which sounds completely bizarre, is the price of sheep in Bulgaria. So what that's got to do with Irish rents is anybody's guess. So what we found that when we were doing rent reviews last December, because inflation had fallen in Ireland, when you went to do a rent review, there actually was no rent review possible. And what happens with a rent review is it can only be done once a year. So the landlord does the rent review, and there was all this misconception by a lot of landlords that they could put up the rent by 4% and then by 2%. But actually what you need to do is use the rent calculator on the RTB website, and that will work it all out correctly. And a lot of landlords have been penalised for doing it incorrectly, not deliberately. It's just there was this misconception it was 2%. So the whole country now is in a rent pressure zone, which has other implications, because in a rent pressure zone, you can't do short-term letting. So the likes of Donegal that might have nice Airbnbs that are depending on income for the local area for the summer, and that all now comes into question. So it has very far-reaching implications. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that the whole country has been treated the same? I don't know. What we would find, what was the problem at the time, was a lot of landlords in 2016 were stuck on very low rents, and they weren't able to put up the rent. And they're still not going to be able to do that, because indefinite tenancies came in 2022, and tenants now can stay quite a period of time, as somebody said one day, until the landlord dies or the tenant dies. And with the new measures, rents can be reset when a tenant goes. We have been campaigning for a long time that the RPC, the rent control should, the set rent should go with the tenancy rather than with the property. So there is, I suppose, some light at the end of the tunnel that rents can be reset when a tenant goes, but from March 2026, everything changes again, and tenancies now become a 6-year, and rents can be reset at the end of 6 years. But it looks like there's going to be what's called a no-fault eviction. So a landlord cannot get their property back to sell it on the open market. They have to sell it to another landlord. And the only family member that they can use it for is a spouse, a parent, or a child, which were some of the reasons that landlords were able to get their properties back in the past. Now, the other thing that has caused a lot of confusion is that they have now created a large landlord and a small landlord. And a large landlord is anybody with over 4 properties. So if you have 4 tenancies, so if you have a pre-63 in 6 or 7 units, you're now a large landlord. So what's the ins and outs around that? If you try to sell the property, you have to terminate all the tenancies. So there's just so much confusion out there, and we know what's happening, and we hear from what's going on in the office and calls to the office, is that landlords are confused, they're panicking, and they're selling. And they're issuing notices of termination, and particularly landlords who are on interest-only mortgages, who are due to come off maybe in the next 3 or 4 years and go on to full capital and repayment. They're saying, I'm getting out now because I'm not going to be able to sell my property maybe in 4 years' time. And if I have to sell it to another investor, is there anybody out there for me to sell it?
And I suppose, so that's been the big the big thing that's come about. I did a social media post there lately, and it kind of it took off, and a lot of the comments and my DMs were saying, so we have to now. So with the new rules coming out in March 2026, you basically have to let a tenant come in. They, within that 6 years, they basically decide whether they want to stay or whether they want to leave. But likelihood is they're going to stay because there's less and less properties now to rent. They have nowhere else to go. Within that 6 years, it is going to be still capped at the 2%. So basically, landlords are kind of losing all control, like more control. So I think what they tried to do was they tried to say, look, we will allow you to set market rent, but a couple of caveats, which are massive caveats. One is it can be every 6 years, or when the tenant decides to leave by themselves. Because then we're going to give landlords extra kind of powers to stay for as long as they like. And the problem is that now we're talking to a lot of letting agencies there recently in the last couple of weeks, and we rent houses ourselves as part of the business, and we're finding it much harder to rent houses now because a lot of landlords apparently are giving eviction notices, and they're going to keep their properties vacant until March of next year. Apparently they are selling their properties, and there's just no kind of demand now, or no kind of appetite for landlords to keep their properties and to rent to tenants anymore. And is that what you're seeing now, Mary? Are you kind of seeing that a lot in the last couple of weeks?
And my whole thing all along has been, we really don't know how many landlords have left the market, because you have RTB figures, you have ESRI figures, you have the agency figures from sales. We do know from speaking to agents, and I know in my practice, I do lettings, I do sales as well. I have termination notices I had 4 termination notices for one landlord this week, and he's coming under pressure from the bank. And he said, look, why would I bother? I'm just getting out of this. And he said, I'm now into the category of large landlords, so I'm not going to be able to sell them at a later stage. So, people are just getting totally frustrated. The whole thing is, we need properties. We need landlords coming into the market, and that's not going to happen. They're just getting out and they're not looking back.
But the institutional investors, the ones that are, going to be building these big kind of apartment blocks, I think that from my reading of the rules, or the new rules that are proposed to come out in March 2026, it would encourage them to build, right? Because they're building brand new houses or brand new apartments, say, and they will be allowed to, increase their rent every year to CPI, or to the inflation rate. And then also they will be able to reset, like when the tenancy moves, and that they can reset then again. And so is that your understanding? And do you think there's going to be more developers come to Ireland now, or like start
Do you know
or
how?
continue to develop?
Do you know how many properties they actually provide at this point in time, and how many private landlords provide? They provide
No.
something like 24,000 properties right across the country. So all the work has been done to pander to these guys who are actually giving a very low supply in a very limited area, renting to very limited tenants. They're the high-end tenants coming in from abroad who are coming in on high salaries. So what we need is incentives to landlords to buy properties down the country, to provide housing down the country, in small towns, in small villages, to give a home to somebody where they grew up that isn't able to afford. Now, the whole problem is that the whole problem is supply. The government stopped building back in the recession when they should have kept going. Then they came up with the idea of HAP, and I know an awful lot of people are opposed to HAP, the homeless assistance payment. But without HAP, there would be even less families being housed. And what I see with the termination notices that are happening now is landlords held on, hoping something was going to happen. They have tenants on very low rent, some really good tenants. There was one guy I spoke to during the week. He's from abroad. He's been working here, I think, about 15 years. He has a family, and he is due to be out of his home on Saturday. He came to a viewing at the opposite end of the city to where he needs to live because he's so desperate. And he rang me. He got my number the other day and he rang me. He didn't realise, and I didn't realise till we were halfway through the conversation, that I'd already met him. But the landlord wants the house for his kids coming to college in Dublin. So this guy has to move. He has homeless HAP of about, I think, maybe 1,500 a month, and he has a good job. So he has plenty of money coming in, but he just can't find anywhere. And he wants to keep in a particular area because his daughter is in school. And there's just so many people like this that are going to be squeezed. If there was some incentive, I mean, I spoke to him about cost rental. He'd never heard of it. But again, cost rental is very limited in the area where he is. So the whole thing is about supply. And what the government are doing is they're actually decimating supply, not increasing it by what they've done.
Yeah.
But Mary, why is that, do you think? Like, did they listen? So when they decided to come up with like these proposed rules, did they listen to the likes of yourself? Did they listen to the people that are on the ground, or did they just kind of come up with it in their own vacuum? Where did they get their information from?
We did have a meeting with the Minister of Housing, and he didn't really engage with us. And I don't really think, I mean, I suppose it's the people with the money that can shout the loudest. And the institutional investors are the ones with the money and the power and the clout, and are able to, talk to government maybe on a different level to the rest of us. But, like they took away the bed sits overnight back in 2013. The bed sits were not perfect, but they were a great, cheap source of housing for a lot of people that worked. They went, and that was the start of it. And landlords' rights have been taken away ever since. And one of my landlords lives in the Philippines. He's a really nice man. He's very funny. And he said to me last week, he rang me, he says, like, what's going on? He says, Mary, the way I describe it is, he said, it's boiling the frog. And I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, there is a term in psychology that if you put a frog into hot water, he dies instantly. But if you put a frog into cold water and you heat it up gently, he basically just kind of peters out. And the landlords are like that. It's been a slow boil. It was the bed sits got rid. Then they came in with the rent pressure zones on a temporary measure that kept on going and kept on going. And it's at the stage now where they're just fed up, burnt out, and they want to go.
Yeah, and it is a big problem for that, and they've brought in the big thing for me in any of the markets is the derelict properties that are lying about.
Yes,
issues that could be solved If
Yeah.
now, not every property is you've got the ability to take back. And Mary, my bread and butter is, absolute dumps, and I
Yeah.
buy them. I just love them because I go, we can restore these. They're
Yeah.
4 walls. Let's go.
Yeah.
And for the life of me, I can't really, there's just so much red tape to get something through,
Yes.
and planning and different elements, and there's a crisis. And I just noticed yesterday the minister came out with all this different elements that he's really, really going to push in on. But for me, the simple fact is that planning has to be sorted. Planning
Yeah.
has to be sorted, and there needs to be incentive for developers, for individuals who are going to put properties back into the market, because this
Yeah.
is a crisis. This isn't a gravy train. Let's be honest. People have the thing I see about developers and landlords. The issue is that they've been beaten for
Yes.
votes, and the votes, God forbid someone's going to do something in life, maybe, there's an objection, and there's a 6-month trial on it, then another 6 months if someone else objects. It's absolute nonsense. Let's call it out. Because if you're going to build, say, 20, 30 houses, it is a nightmare. And you've got financial costs, you've got other aspects to think about, material cost rises, you've got staffing issues now, where the other risk is that, who's going to build these bloody houses? Because modular has been tried in the UK, ain't the answer. I haven't seen any sufficient evidence to say it is going to be the answer. So where are we going to go here? And pandering to pension funds and pandering to different individuals is fine, but what is going to be the real outcome there? Rents are going to go through the absolute roof, and that is something they're not talking about either. But
yeah, I was at lunch briefing yesterday by Pascal O'Donoghue, and he was, asked about the housing and the economy, and somebody said to him, would you consider Section 23 incentives again? And for anybody who doesn't know, Section 23 came out in the late 1990s, and what it was derelict parts of the city, properties were built, whole apartment blocks were built, and a landlord could buy one, and a certain amount of the property was tax deductible against your other rental income, and it lasted for 10 years. And I had 3 or 4 of them, and it gave me a very nice tax-free income for a couple of years. But without all those apartments being built back then, things would be in a much worse situation than they were now. And we have urged them to consider Section 23 again, because it would, regenerate some areas. It wasn't necessarily in the Dublin area. I know there was holiday home incentives and stuff like that.
There was hotel incentives, and there was incentives.
Accommodation. There were Section 50s, but he's completely outruled that. And he just said, no, I don't think so. It's just not going to work. So, where is it all going? I don't know. And you're right, rents will rise because it's back to supply and demand.
But looking at that incentive, I remember that time I was I bought my first property actually in Sligo, where you're native Sligo, and there was tax designated development. I think it was a couple £100 a month for me anyway. That was the savings, which is fantastic at that time. So it got me on the property ladder and got me going. We really have to look at those aspects of it, and whatever about the hotels and things like that. I think you could bin that idea, but specifically for the new build market anyway, it does need that. And the derelict grants have been a success. I know in the different areas around here they've been utilised. So there needs a bit more incentive. But we've been straight away down to hard business. But first of all, I'm going to try and bring it back a wee bit. Mary, you've been in the property market for quite some time, and you have an unbelievable story, first of all. And I didn't realize, yes, I think some of our listeners might have known that you were a nurse in the past, but maybe tell us about that, first of all. And just not an ordinary nurse now, Mary. You have to give yourself a bit of credit here.
I came to Dublin in 1982, and I trained as a nurse in Baggot Street. And for anybody who knows Baggot Street, it's the big old red building that is sitting there now for the last number of years. It closed in 1987. and it's an amazing building. Something should be done to repurpose it. So I did many things. I then trained as a midwife in Drogheda. I worked in all around the city. I've multiple qualifications. I worked in the Middle East. I worked in the UK. And I bought my first property with my then husband in 1996. And that was a 3-bed house in Drumcondra, which we still have. And we were very close to St. Pat's College. So we did student lettings. We managed to turn the house into a 5-bed, I think at the time. It's now a 6-bed. And times were good. Within a year, we bought another one. And by 2008, we had 16 properties and made some bad choices and some bad buys and didn't take the right tax advice and did interest only and did everything wrong. So the recession hit and things were tough. We did, at that stage, we had quite a few student lets around DCU and St. Pat's, and they were good properties in good condition. We had 6 or 8 beds and never had a problem filling them for the summer or as well as the academic year. And even still, I'm getting calls from people who rented from me way back to see have I got anything. So then the recession hit, things got a bit tough, rents fell, anyway, by 2012, my husband left quite unexpectedly. And at that point, I had a very busy job as a bowel cancer nurse specialist in Beaumont. And I was trying to juggle everything. I had 90 tenants, I think, from 35 different countries. And I had the banks on screaming at me for repayments because some of the payments had been missed. And within a very short space of time, I've had 4 repossessions. And the fallout from that is still happening. So I burnt out.
I suppose that time, Mary, I suppose when things were going good, and obviously you were like everyone else in Ireland at that stage, were just the postman. Everybody was buying property, and And suppose reflecting on that, Mary, what decision did you make at that time, or did you even think at that time what you were doing, or talk to me
No,
about
because
that?
it was easy. You borrowed 100% and your stamp duty, and we're talking about stamp duty now at 7% in some cases, 7.5%, and you kitted it out, and there was never any shortage of tenants coming in. And we built a house in 2008, and then the recession hit. And it was a 9-bed house. And I suppose without even knowing what we were doing, the company that had it left. They were here. We did a lot of construction contracts with Eastern European companies coming in. That was from about 2001. So 2009, basically, they all left. So we created a HMO. We didn't know what we were doing, and we rented by the room. And that was an interesting challenge. I learned very quickly what nationalities you can put in and together and whatnot. And we still have that. It's about to come to market. And it was a strange time. And then I just found myself uncontrollably crying one day, and I realized there was something wrong. And I ended up going into hospital for tests, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. I saw the psychiatrist to make sure there was nothing going on in my head. And they said, look, you're just doing too much, you're burnt out. So I decided then that I would take a year out from nursing, and I've actually never gone back. I went back to college and studied for my real estate license. And what I really hoped to do was to set up as a senior move manager to work with older people who are trying to right size. But COVID hit and there was no work. So I said, what can I do best? What have I been doing the longest? So I turned my hand to letting. And in latter years, I've done block management and sales. And a little bit of move management, but not as much as I'd like to do.
You're on mute, Pauric.
I said a whistle stop tour there, Mary. Some journey, Lisa, from when Mary started. So
I've been involved then with property owners for about 25, 26 years. And I was the first female committee member a few years ago. And then for the last, 2-3 years, I have been the chairperson of the association. And we've had a lot of challenges. We've had the eviction ban. We've had everything else going on, and I've seen, of course, the setup of the RTB and everything that goes on with that. And it's very challenging times for landlords, particularly the older
that,
ones.
Yeah, the older ones for sure. So
Yeah.
with that, Mary, right? So say the person who's listened to this podcast may be a landlord with an existing tenant, possibly charging slightly under market rent. With the new rules being brought out, Mary, and they call you for some advice. Tenants are paying, but they're under market rent. What would be like? I know it might not be the most popular opinion, but what would your opinion be on it? Should they get out now, or like, so they can reset the market rent next year, or does that then put them into the new rules where they lose access to their house then for the next 6 years? What is the general kind of concerns people are ringing in with at the moment? And I suppose, what advice are you giving them?
Well, for a start, I don't work in the office. We have a team of 3 very well qualified people who take the calls. I mean, you can't put somebody up to put up the rent. You have to have a reason, like you're going to do substantial refurbishment or something like that. And I did a substantial refurbishment notice for somebody during the week, and it's mind-blowing what he's going to spend on the house. He's had the same tenants there for 15 years on a really low rent, and they've completely trashed it. And he has to get them out because he knows that if an inspector is going to come on in, the house is going to be failed. So everybody's circumstances are different. There's a lot of older landlords whose kids certainly aren't interested in taking on all of this. There is no incentive to pass the business on, because you'll end up with so much tax on it that a lot of landlords are just saying, right, I'm getting out now. And what particularly is going to be hit is the pre-63s, the houses and units, because, you have to sell something vacant possession really to realise its value. So how do you're going to have to get each tenancy terminated. So I know there's a lot of landlords struggling with that at the moment, and no other landlord is going to buy them. They'll be, probably converted into family homes. And the one upside I would see on all of this is for first-time buyers, is that there's going to be a lot of property coming to the market from landlords getting out. One of my sons is looking to buy a house at the moment, and I just said, look, hold tight. There's properties going to come to market. They're not going to be in the best condition. They're going to be a bit tired, but at the end of the day, they're good, solid properties.
Yeah, so I suppose that was a lot of the kind of the feedback as well over the last couple of weeks is, look, we're not losing houses. They're just going to turn from rentals to homeowners. But I suppose my argument there is that not everybody wants or can own a home. Like, we need a real strong functioning rental market.
Yes.
We've got so many people like that are not native to Ireland, or they don't want to necessarily live in Dublin, or they don't want to live they just come in there for their
transient
jobs.
workers.
So we need a real strong rental market.
Yeah. Regardless, like we do need to. And what really strikes me is if I go to do a sales viewing, and you do an open viewing, and the people show up, you might not have one Irish buyer in this. In particular parts of the city, you might have 10 Indian buyers come to look at a house. And I don't think anybody ever factored from the government side that, people will come in, they will like it here, they will stay, they will settle, they will buy houses. So they have completely underestimated our needs and what's required.
And do you
scary?
And do you see, Mary, we're potentially at a stage where prices are too high? And the economics of it would indicate that, that the job salary, mightn't be where it needs to be for purchasing property in Ireland.
The government are very cautious. The banks are very cautious about what they lend, particularly the pillar banks like I hate to see if I have a purchaser with a mortgage from Bank of Ireland, because there will always be some little thing thrown in the mix before the end. They look at the house again, and they look at the salaries, and they'll decide, well, that over time is not sustainable, so we'll take that off the mortgage. So I think the banks are probably cooling the whole thing down. People do get a bit frenzied and keep bidding, but Look, at the end of the day, it's supply and demand. And there are also people out there with a lot of money and a lot of savings, particularly after COVID. And it shocks me sometimes when I see the amount of money that some first-time buyers have towards a house. They're getting quite a small mortgage and you're saying, well, this is X and you only have Y, where's the rest of it? And whether it's from the bank of mom and dad or whatever, I don't know. But, people do have money and they're prepared to pay high prices for a house. It's a long-term investment. If you're getting it over 25 or 35 years, it's not as bad as an investor who's trying to get a quick return. So it's a completely different mindset.
Yeah. So two observations as a result of you just talking there. One is that the rents, we rent houses from landlords, and we're seeing some of the rates are like really, really high, and you'd be wondering, how can people afford, like, we're a business, so we're treating this as a business, so we can afford those rents. But how can a family, like, maybe two-income family afford some of those rents? Like, I think for one house, we're actually paying 4,200 for a rent per month. Crazy money. Absolutely. For someone to actually have 4,200 in after-tax income in order to pay their rent is, to me, is just absolutely shocking. So that's my first kind of point. And I think that there's a general consensus out there that all landlords are greedy. But my thing on that is no, they're not actually. But what's actually after happening, I think, is people are so scared that once they're in this whole rent pressure zone and in the system, they can't change it. So therefore, like, only 2% per year, which is basically nothing. So basically what they're doing is they're going to go front load the rent there now. So anyone that is a new property that's just come to market, they're really going to go hard and heavy with the rent because they know that once they're in the system, they can't change it. So I think it's creating this false kind of stupidly high rents, and then the ones that have been stuck with like the stupidly low rents, and there's very little in between at the moment. And I just think that the whole rent pressure zone and the whole kind of regulations is really, like, not helping this, right?
Yeah, because they had this in Finland and they lifted it, and they lifted the rent pressure zone, and rents went up marginally for a short space of time, and then they fell because landlords came into the market. And the other thing is, and not everybody wants to live in a palace. What our standards are way too high. It's like the difference between a Mercedes and a Mini. There should be the standards of build and the standards of quality. It doesn't all need to be really high-end granite worktop kind of stuff. There is a margin in the middle where people are quite happy and they will do it up as they go along, or they will move ahead. And the other thing is, in Europe, if you go to rent a property, you have to put in your own kitchen and your own wardrobes. We're expected to do everything, including the white goods, and maintain them.
Yeah.
So,
That's right. Gavin
we
Gallagher
need to be a
mentioned
bit creative on this. Yeah.
Gavin
Absolutely.
Gallagher, we had him on at some stage or in a networking event, and he said the same thing about you, about the bed sits. He said they got rid of them, but actually there's a market for every, like, we need this level, we need this level, we need this level, we need this level, and there's a market for every level. But with like, by getting rid of the bed sits, they were saying, oh no, everybody has to have their own bathroom, they can't share a bathroom. Is that really the case? Like, really, the real low income kind of earners, I'm pretty sure that they rather have a roof over their head and share a bathroom than have no roof over their head and live in an emergency accommodation. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just yeah, you
also
echoed exactly what he was saying.
it's about thinking about the market a little bit, as well. And as I say, student accommodation, things like that. I remember my property I stayed in. But the level, as you indicated, Mary, it has increased, which is a good thing too. But it's definitely, when I look at I travel a lot, and I've come to a stage to say I don't like staying in hotels. I'd rather get a place to stay, and like, we would go to different shows and things, and instead of going into a hotel, spending an absolute fortune, you get a nice apartment, or you can, so the market and what people want has changed over the years as well. And I know you've indicated about the Airbnb and that aspect as well, but people love, like, I was away with the kids in Southampton, for example, the Peppa Pig World. My biggest nightmare is staying in a hotel. I'd rather stay somewhere where we could have an apartment, we could have, we could make a bite to eat, we could kick back and relax. So all those things, it has to be thought about a wee bit more, I think, before legislation comes in. And
yeah, and I think the students are really being badly let down, because there's all this very nice high-end student accommodation, but really who can afford it? Like what I used to do was I'd have a 6-bed house, it was probably 400 each a month or whatever, and it worked well. It wasn't high-end, and it was clean, it was functional, they had everything. I mean, some of them were really nice, but that's not available anymore, and students are missing out on the student experience because they're commuting. And even where I live in just off Ballymun Road, close to DCU. There was always a buzz in September when the students came back, and there was always students around because the sports grounds are quite close. And that's gone. There's no atmosphere anymore. It was just one day in October last year, so there's something missing. And it was just the students weren't around because they'd gone home.
I have student HMOs, and I say I work in Derry City. The population, they're trying to get it up to 10,000. Now legislation has come in, which is good in one way, but detrimental and completely detrimental in another way. They've invested 50-60 million pounds into this particular university. Now the HMO legislation has they're trying to change it as a square footage, and it's one thing that bringing it back from you can only have a certain number of rooms in a house, and it doesn't lend itself to the redevelopment of the house. Investors aren't doing it because the costs and everything else. So it's a bit of a mess now, to be quite honest. But the thing about this is that once you've higher rents, you have higher fees to get into a location, that leaves less capital to actually go and spend in the city or the town that you're in to get that experience. We all know going to university is great crack, but you have to study as well, unlike Lisa, But as I say, Mary, and to come back on that point, it's about getting the balance here. It's about getting that balance right. And I think
and the supply,
and it's been very. And I know we're chatting about at every level, and you're chatting about education as well. It's got that expensive. That's another choice for people, and students have to work longer. But it's been definitely an interesting. We said we were going to do half an hour, but we could do a couple of hours with Mary, I think, Lisa, couldn't we?
Yeah,
thanks very much.
Yeah, no, we was brilliant having you on, Mary, and it's great to get your insight into this, because I suppose it's become very topical there with the announcements. Mary, is there any hope that they might actually backtrack on some of this, given, like, say, some of the backlash, and maybe would they, before they actually bring in the rules, maybe by next March, would they maybe go back and look at what the impact has been over the last year since they announced it to when they're actually going to implement it, or is it set in stone?
So I will just say one thing, and I'll leave it on this. Is it constitutionally correct to interfere with a owner's property rights?
It's all about control, isn't it? We've lost control. And is that right?
Is it constitutionally correct?
So what do we need to do, Mary? I think we need to get a group of solicitors or something on board.
Not saying anything.
I love it, Mary. I love it. You put a food for thought into all of our minds.
Yeah, you give us a bit of hope there, Mary. But it's such an amazing journey, Mary. Not only, as I say, I love to get in behind the person, who does these things.
It's been great. I mean, there's been awful days. I've been to weddings, I've been to christenings of tenants, I've been attacked with a knife, I've had all kinds of things, but I've enjoyed it, and I've met absolutely amazing people along the way.
They're good people everywhere you go, and as I say, there's solutions there as well. But have you enjoyed your journey in property since you left the nursing? Are you going to go back? Huh?
Oh gosh, no, I'm too old to go back at this stage. I intend working for a very long time in property, so yeah.
Fantastic, Mary. Look, well done.
And like you, Mary.
Thank you.
Well done. And the responsibility of being the chair now. How have you enjoyed that, Mary? Has that been?
It's been challenging. I mean, there's been a lot of kind of radio interviews when you've come off and you said, "Oh, I shouldn't have said," but and people are ringing and say, "You shouldn't have said this. You should have said that." It's very different and difficult when you're on the spur of a moment, and there's a politician telling absolute blatant lies beside you, as in one case. And I attacked him home. I got out of the studio and I said, "You told lies," and he just laughed. So you can only do your best, and what happens at the moment is just
welcome to the world of votes, and that's
Yeah.
that's the other side of it. Media, I suppose, that's part of the gig as well, Mary. And I
Yeah.
suppose any of the interviews I've heard you doing has been really, really well done, and fair play to you, because it's not easy. It's not easy actually when you're on air or you're speaking.
Well, at the end of the day, we're all people. It's whether you're a tenant or a landlord. And, landlords for the most part are good people and they want to provide a good service for their tenants. And tenants for the most part are great. I mean, saying that now, I had a determination order this morning. I'm very happy with the tenant has to go. He hasn't paid rent for months and months. But, it's difficult for everybody, and I think the tenants are the ones that are going to be most affected by these new rules, and they're the ones going to be most punished because there's going to be even less choice.
Well, look, Mary,
Absolutely.
thanks very much for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you.
That was a fantastic interview once again with another fantastic individual. Mary had did she answer all your questions, Lisa? Because I know there was a few there that I was trying to wrap my head around, make it sit in my head. But there is a lot in the Irish property sector at the minute to get your head around as a landlord and investor. It's a
There's
bit
a
of a
lot to
minefield.
unpick there, and it's a minefield. And I suppose anyone that's kind of still got questions, I'm part of the IPOA myself, and I encourage anyone to sign up to it. And that's where you can get really good advice from the IPOA. If they've got any specific questions. And I suppose, Mary, if people are looking for a letting agency, are you specifically based around Dublin, or if somebody wants you to take yourself on as a letting agent, where's your property portfolio based?
Pretty much Dublin, Meath and Kildare.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, all
Yeah.
over. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Great. So reach out to
Brilliant.
Mary if anybody needs a letting agent. And yeah, be great. And as I said, the IPOA, I'm a member of it. I think a lot of landlords are members of it. And especially with the new regulations coming up there now, don't try and do it by yourself. Don't make any decisions yourself without getting proper information. And for me, that would be going to the IPOA for that level of information.
Great. Okay.
Thanks very much.
You.
Okay, thanks very much to Mary. Thanks to you, Lisa. Of course, this podcast is brought to you in association with City Stays and, City Stays all across Ireland. Lisa, you're doing fantastic work, so well done there. And also, Gap Property Investments, helping you get a better return on your investment through property. Check us out. Check us out at gappropertyinvestments.com. And Lisa, continue the education. She's doing well, Mary, on the education part. She's been over and back and studying like a mad woman. So well done there.
Never stop.
Thanks a million. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Bye.